this festival is new to me, so I'm very happy to be here. My joke has been coming at this late stage. My talk is called Democracy Fatigue, but there must be a lot of Litfest fatigue. So I will try to make this painless, swift, and on time, but I can't promise a great deal of entertainment. The subject is a bit sober, but still, I hope you will stay awake or pretend to do so for another half an hour or so. So the central question of our times is why we are witnessing the worldwide rejection of liberal democracy and its replacement by some sort of populist authoritarianism. The strong signs of this trend are to be found in Trump's America, Putin's Russia, Modi's India, and Erdogan's Turkey. In addition, we have numerous European examples of already existing authoritarian governments, Orban in Hungary, Meloni in Italy, Wilders most recently in the Netherlands, and major aspirants to authoritarian right-wing rule in France, Austria, and other European Union countries. The total population of these countries is almost a third of the total population of the world. That is, of the countries moving to the right worldwide. There has been growing alarm about this global shift to the right, but we have relatively few good explanations of it. This, in my view, is what the leaders of the new authoritarian populisms have in common. A recognition that none of them can truly control their national economies, which are hostages to foreign investors, global agreements, transnational finance, and mobile labor and capital in general. All of them promise national cultural purification as a route to global political power. All of them are friendly to neoliberal capitalism with their own version of how to make it work for India, Turkey, the US, Russia, etc. All of them to seek to translate soft power into hard power. None of them have any hesitation about repressing minorities and dissidents, stifling free speech, or using the law to throttle their opponents. In each of these cases, and in many of the populist pockets of Europe, there is a fatigue, hence my title, with democracy itself. And this fatigue is the basis of the electoral successes of leaders who promise to abrogate all the liberal, deliberative, and inclusive components of their national versions of democracy. It might be objected that all populist leaders thrive on this sort of frustration with democracy and have built their careers on it, going back to Hitler, Perón, Stalin, and many other leaders from the first half of the 20th century, who exploited the failures of the democracies of their times and places. So what is new about today's democracy fatigue? So I'd say there are three ways in which today's large-scale feeling of being fed up with democracy itself has a distinctive logic and context. The first is that the spread of the internet and the social media to growing sectors of the population and the availability of web-based mobilization, propaganda, identity building, and peer seeking has created the dangerous illusion that we can all find peers, allies, friends, collaborators, converts, and colleagues, whoever we are, and whatever we want. You only need one more person and you have a party going. The second is the fact that every single nation state has lost ground in its efforts to maintain any semblance of economic sovereignty. And I truly believe that whether the US or Cameroon, whether you're at the top or the bottom of the UN list of wealthy countries, unwealthy countries, you are all in no position to control your national economy. It's an illusion. The third factor is that the worldwide spread of the ideology of human rights has given some minimal purchase to strangers, foreigners, and migrants in virtually every country in the world, even if they face harsh welcomes and severe conditions wherever they move. So together, these three factors have deepened the global intolerance for due process, deliberative rationality, and political patience that democratic systems always require. When we add to these three factors the worldwide deepening of economic inequality, the global erosion of social welfare, and the planetary penetration of those financial industries that thrive on multiplying the idea that we are all at risk of financial disaster, impatience with the slow temporalities of democracy is compounded by a constant climate of economic panic. The same populist leaders who promise prosperity for all often deliberately produce this sort of panic, as in the Prime Minister's decision here to try to root out, as we were told, black money by demonetizing 500 and 100 rupee notes, as you all recall. This was an excellent case of induced economic distress and financial panic. So a new chapter, I think, is being written in the worldwide incidence of authoritarian populism, and it is founded on a partial overlap between the ambitions and promises of its leaders and the mentalities of its followers. These leaders oppose the spirit of democracy because it is an obstacle to their monomaniacal pursuit of power. The followers are victims of democracy fatigue who see electoral politics as see electoral politics as the best way to exit democracy itself. That is elections. What do you do in elections? You finish democracy off. So it's a new use of elections. So this hatred and this exhaustion find their natural ground in the common ground in the space of cultural sovereignty, enacted in scripts of racial victory for resentful majorities, national ethnic purity, and global resurgence through the promises of soft power. So this is going on all over the world. This common cultural ground inevitably hides the deep contradictions between the neoliberal economic policies of most of these authoritarian leaders and their well-documented crony capitalism and the genuine suffering and anxiety of the bulk of their mass followings. This common ground is also the terrain of a new politics of exclusion whose targets are either migrants or internal ethnic others. Just a word on demagoguery, one of those multi-syllable words that we all use all the time. All demagogues are angry, but each is angry in his own way. Like the idea of propaganda, the category of demagogue is frequently treated as an explanation when it is only a label, a first step towards explaining the rise and fall of ideologies. The two labels are connected, that is propaganda and demagoguery, since the circulation of propaganda is often associated with the rise of demagogues, and propaganda is treated as the other of truth, just as demagogues are treated as a toxic subset of genuine charismatic leaders. But neither term has been thoughtfully analyzed, and both belong to a tradition of labeling which has its roots in the preferential use of the term ideology, in quotes, to malign the truth claims of one's opponents. These are all terms which thrive by being naturalized and treated as commonsensical. Oh, that's propaganda. Oh, he's a demagogue. Well, actually, they tell you nothing. They're just little things we stick onto people. And they thus, by becoming commonsensical, they evade critical examination. A demagogue is widely defined as someone who incites anger against elites by inflaming the passions and playing to the emotions of ordinary people. Propaganda is a way to forcefully circulate untruths or partial truths, often by demagogues who have seized power. Ideology becomes the loosely liberal term for the ideas of those who employ demagoguery and propaganda, thus departing, that is the word ideology, from its original 18th century meaning as the worldview of an epoch. He didn't have any negative spin. It was just the ideology of the 18th century. Now it has a different meaning. Today's liberal left, I count myself in that proud but shrinking number, regards such figures as Trump or Orban, Erdogan, Modi, and more as demagogues who have captured power by exciting the emotions of common people and who aim to maintain power through the employment of propaganda. This analysis is not wrong inherently, but it fails to ask which demagogic claims find emotional resonance among ordinary audiences, thereby attaining the status of common sense. So one footnote here is common sense is a very hard thing to get to. To make sense common, you have to do a lot of work. Absent such distinctions, these labels, as I say, are no more than invective, name-calling. So I look a little more closely now at two examples, Trump and Modi, acting in vastly different political contexts, who both strive to retain power or return to office in 2024. They have both won the battle for the emotions in their countries. Modi has achieved demigod status among his followers. This is all no news to anybody here. Is seen as the one-man cause of the national success of his party, the BJP, and that may well be true, and is among the most popular leaders on the global stage as well. By the way, anybody who has answered to the question, why is he a superstar on the global stage, I think deserves a prize. I think about it all the time. It's not straightforward. Trump has a remarkably resilient following among Republican voters and has something close to parity with the incumbent, Joseph Biden, in many polls, in spite of a mountain of evidence of his lies, corruption, and contempt for the Constitution. So Trump in many ways is very different. The trials are continuing. He has more and more trials, more and more rulings against him, more and more threats that he'll go to prison. And meanwhile, the polls, he's rising. Wonderful. Modi and Trump are both, you might say, demagogues whose divisive messages have tapped the terrain of popular affect, feeling, emotion. But the differences are also massive. Prime Minister Modi is a supremely smooth, charming, and skilled user of elections, law, and mass media in building his following. He's a masterful manager of the messages that work on the Indian campaign trail and the soothing needed for international dealings and his global PR successes. He is supremely rational. Trump is, of course, a walking commercial for the Clinical Handbook of Psychological Disorders. These similarities, despite differences, invite us to look deeper than what mere labeling shows. And here's, I'm going to go through my few remaining pages, which I attempt to show that something is going on globally. The goalposts are moving steadily right. My right. Your right being that way, being left. But each story is different. The India story and the Turkey story are different from the US story and the Hungarian story, though there is some world forces which I hope I've touched on already. And what I would say is in both these countries, in the case of Trump and Modi, I'm just picking them out because I lived for a long time in the US and still somewhat obsessively follow what's happening in the US. And of course, I professionally, in many other ways, am deeply immersed in what is happening in India in as many ways as I can be, though I'm not here all the time. So that's why these two cases are not randomly chosen. If I wanted to speak about Turkey or Hungary, I would have to go back to graduate school and do another 3 PhDs, so I avoid that for a moment. But here's what I want to say. In both cases, they are doing something which speaks to democracy fatigue, but rubs against the grain of their basic history and political culture. How does this happen? In the case of Trump, we have to remember, and here I draw on an anthropologist whom I discuss here, French anthropologist, very famous, no longer alive, influenced a lot of us, Louis Dumont. He wrote a book called Homo Hierarchicus, that is, hierarchy in India and its absence in the West. Very influential, very controversial. Many people, including me, criticized it, but I take away from it something now that I never saw in the first 60 years of my life, but I do see now. And that is, his argument was in the West, and these are very broad stroke arguments, the individual, capital I, is the key to everything, is the empirical key, the normative key, the political key. In India, he said, it's not the individual, it's hierarchy. And hierarchy meant for him, the part only makes sense because of the whole. Hierarchy for him was not rank. So we all think, oh, hierarchy, yeah, this is a top and bottom society. That is there. But his big idea was there is no significance to any part other than the whole to which it belongs. You make sense because of your family, family makes sense because of the caste makes sense because of something else, it goes on. I think what has happened, if you take this very rough, ideal, typical contrast, US is built on Western liberalism in which without individual, the whole house of cards comes down. India is built on something opposite, something compositional, coordinated, social, larger than the coach. In fact, individual doesn't exist. That's a Dumontian extreme version. My argument is that in the US, Trump has found a new way for people to be social, not to be individual. In other words, to connect with people who are angry like you. We spoke about anger earlier in the session with our distinguished diplomat author. What's anger and what anger management? So anger, envy, fear, rage, all these things now are the instruments of building collectivity. So actually what Trump is doing is something revolutionary. He's not doing what the Biden and all do, which is still at the end of the day saying the individual will be better off, you will rise, the old American stories. He's saying, no, you have to connect. So he's created a, what I call in another context, polymorphous populism. That means people is something very lovely. It's soft, it's cuddly, it's wonderful. And to say that in the West, in the US particularly, is a very tricky thing because usually collective there means socialist. Socialist means communist. Communist means better be dead. But he has brought back the idea that you only make sense if you're together. So that's the Trump story. That's the Trump revolution. And that is the Trump capture of the emotions. Is suddenly by telling people, you know, you can connect. And you can connect through anger, envy, jealousy, and feeling that you've fallen. In other words, make America great again is actually make whites great again. As many people have pointed out, I'm not original in that. We were at the top, and now you look at all these people, brown people, black people climbing here, Silicon Valley, this thing, that thing, terrible. So he is producing the social. The idea of people as a social thing in a world which was previously all about individuals. What is Modi doing? Modi, I think, is doing the exact reverse. In a collectivist society, of course he like everybody, has to recognize there are castes. In elections, you can't forget who is in UP, who is in this district, who is there. He's empirically very smart, but he has unleashed for India the idea of the individual. But this is not about equality. This is about movement. You can aspire, you can rise, you can be richer. It's a call, in other words, to a kind of idea of the individual, which someone like Dumont thought happens only in the West. But Modi's genius is to say, you can rise. Don't worry about your family, this thing. That's all fine, and that's good for elections, politics, family, this. But it's you. You can make money, you can become wealthy, you can become powerful. I think Revati has also spoken about this. It's the you of that which is not fundamentally really social at all. So the fact that caste is very big in India, religion is very big, family is very big, also distracts us from something which is being incubated, which is you can forget all that at the end of the day. And that is Modi's promise. So I think what I mean to say here is that these are two contexts. the USA and India, in which we have to resist two temptations. One is to say they're totally different. By why are we mixing up all these things? India is, 25,000-year-old civilization, as we know. US is 2 months old. They're all new, this, that. One is this way, one is that way. But the truth is, the shift to the right unites them and many other countries. But still, the nature of the capture of the terrain of the emotions by this growing right-wing is different in terms of what it taps and what it moves. Because if you try to do a Trump here, it's going to bomb. In fact, I'm sure there are many would-be Trumps who are in play in India. It doesn't work. And if you try to be Modi in the US, that's also a non-starter. But Trump is a starter. But they're doing slightly different things with the terrain of affect. So I want to conclude, I don't know where I am on time, but I think Q&A is a good idea. Anyway, with summarizing my message this way, and I speak now as I say, a disappearing species, which are liberals, but I'm on the left side of that and always sliding further left, but still I would say I'm liberal. But I would have to say liberals and the left, however large or small it might be, have lost the battle worldwide in the terrain of emotion. Till we come to terms with that, I think the rest, it's a losing battle if you are in that position. Of course, if you're on the other side, it's great news because you are successful, you have power, you have the terrain of affect, it's win-win-win. But if you're not on that side or have reservations or worries, we have to ask ourselves what we can do in the terrain of affect. And by affect and emotion, I also don't mean we have to stop thinking or the end of cognition, forget reason, because then it's the same screaming match all over. It's a much more complex affair of how we can get into that terrain in a manner that seizes the imagination, moves people to action, and indeed draws on thinking too, but not only on abstract arguments about deliberative democracy, procedures, courts, or in the left-wing case, class solidarity, working classes, bring down capitalism. This is all fine, but it's a bit bloodless and context-free. You have to come towards the locality. These are general formulae. They don't even work in their home countries. In Russia, in China, the US, France, you can't give these rote formulae. So we need something there. I don't know what that is, but I hope I've given you an argument for why that is a very pressing question, namely the question of how those of us who are running against this grain in some way can have some terrain to fight on.
Hello, Professor Appadurai. It's lovely to hear you in person after having read your books for a very long time. My name is Pritika. I'm an architect, but I deal with research in public spaces, dealing with democracy as a theme in public space. So after having listened to your session, and you say that through Modi, a kind of individualistic approach has come in, right? But is it fair to attribute it all to Modi, or is it a process that has happened over time as a representational kind of democracy for about almost 8 decades now, where we've switched to a centralized system which was not necessarily Indian in origin? So is there a connection between that and the situation we find ourselves in right now?
Well, thank you very much. Excellent question, and a reminder that my observations are at a sketch level, and full of what we call ideal typical contrast, which means stereotypes actually of huge areas. But in India particularly, the slide towards the micro detail, but what about, Egmore, is also the other danger, that you never say anything because there's always something more specific. That's a different point, but my picture has been very broad. So let me fill in a few gaps. I don't think he's done it single-handed. Just as I think all the achievements of the BJP have built on a huge amount of things put in place below. And I'm not the only one to say this. It's not that life began in 2014. Things began in 1947. In fact, to be honest, they began long before 1947. The British, as we recall, built some things, railroads, etc. We've heard of them. So there's a very long run-up. You might say there's also a very long run-up to divisiveness and politics of hate. That also has a history. Nothing is invented overnight. But the question then is, what you add to, as it were, power up, put that formula all on steroids, go nuclear with all that, then you can build on it, but that's a further push. But be that as it may, on individualism, there is precedent. In other words, I myself have written an essay in 2004 called The Capacity to Aspire. So aspiration horizon has grown all over the world. And indeed, a very simple way of saying why are people so angry, again anger, in, say, India, is the aspiration horizon shows you this. 3 BHK, what your architects are also producing all over. But then 3 BHK is not available overnight. Yes, you can get a mortgage, but what's the rate, etc. So the shortfall is also palpable. But the fact is, some kind of aspirational individualism has a fairly long history. You might even say going back to central planning and all, because there was a target there, which was the mobile individual. So I'll just conclude this response by saying, of course, Modi doesn't single-handedly either invent whatever the positive indices are in India today, or all the division. It's like you can't, history doesn't happen anew, So there's a big canvas, and individualism, you might even say predatory individualism. It says, forget the family, forget religion. I want my scooter, I want my 3 BHK, I want this, I want that, I want my promotion, I want my job, has also a long history. But now I think it is being loosened or unleashed at a new level. And because it is combined with a certain form of majoritarianism, etc., it takes on a dangerous quality. It's not in itself anything evil.
Very good evening, sir. I'm Sriram. Was definitely a very...
I have to
I'm here, actually.
He's there. He's there.
Okay, got you.
Yeah. That was an insightful talk and a very important one in today's political climate. Before I ask my question, I just want to make a disclaimer that I don't belong to the left or to the right. I don't like any ideological labels. So I'm just asking this as someone concerned about today's politics. The title of this talk is Why is the World Moving Towards the Right? But I just want to pose a counterpoint. Maybe the more important question to ask ourselves is, why are liberals and leftists losing the race? What are the reasons where in many countries the liberal leaders or the leftist leaders continue to lose elections? Is it because of the lack of strong leaders, or is it because of any other reasons? In my opinion, I believe that the reason why people choose right-wing leaders is because of the lack of a viable option. So maybe the more pertinent question to ask is, why are liberal leaders losing the race?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. In the written form of this paper, I say something more clear than I said today, which is the failure of one side, let us call it the liberal and left side, in relation to the right, whether it's the US, here, there, anywhere, should not be treated as two sides of the same coin. It's not a hydraulic theory. Left is going down, so right is rising. It is not nature abhorreth a vacuum. We have to explain these things separately. We have to say, why has impatience with democracy grown? When has it begun to accelerate? And on the left, we have to ask, what is it that the left has succeeded in doing and what has it failed to do? One of the things I'm saying is giving and this is true of liberalism too, and the liberal left, is abstract intellectual arguments only go so far in the world in which we are today. However true and accurate they are, you have to move somewhere else. That is true. But that is not the only reason why there's been a shrinkage of the spaces. So the US is a very different story. It's always had a huge anti-communist heritage. Not quite true in England, not true in Europe, not true in Germany where I am now, and certainly not true in India. So the question of the left has to be asked independently generally. I was not trying to answer all of it, but some of the things, and as to the right, again, it's a complex story, but I was trying to say one answer is for reasons having political, historical, economic causes, market causes, growth of capitalism causes, no one wants to wait. I want X and Y now. That's the common element. Now, there are, of course, many other things, but I'd stress that as a cause for the right to find a space to move in and say, we'll give it to you, and we'll do it by this way, this way, and this way. And by the time that doesn't work out, people have moved on. So that's just a beginnings of an answer.
Right. Maybe one final question, a quick one. The lady here, very, very quickly.
Thank you for that very persuasive lecture. I'm just wondering if you would consider that the strategies of institutional capture that happened during the ascendance of the left and the neoliberal economy are exactly the ones that are being used by the right. Maybe on steroids, but there is similarity in strategies of institutional capture. And maybe that explains a part of the democracy fatigue. Would you consider that?
Yeah, if I understand you right, thank you. I may not fully get the spin, but yes, just as there's a history, none of these failures or successes, say, can be segregated to say, right failed this one captured that. The growth, I mean, now I'll play my main card. I think the foundational structural problem of the last few hundred years for modern people all over is the nation state. In other words, it is at the start, and this is a risky thing to say, even today, when nations are crumbling, killing each other, warring, fighting, economically sinking, etc., but it is foundational to our thinking. It's the envelope in which we think of ourselves. My nation, your nation, it's the fundamental geometry. So, yes, in the process of evolving, whether in Europe, the US, India, the whole third world or whatever, that form has a particular set of institutional commitments. Judiciary, media, this, that. And that defines the space on which we all have to play. So whether we subvert, capture, co-opt, get by vote, get by coercion, get by corruption, that landscape is set. So in that sense, I agree with you. Everybody is more or less on the same table. My complaint is I wish there was an alternative way of thinking. And I've spent 40 years arguing this, often making lots of enemies, because it's often seen as anti-national. But my point is, it's all nations. I'm not talking about India, Pakistan, this one, that one. The whole lot, the whole UN list is based on a fiction, an artificial form, which has become foundational to our thinking. But it is not God-given. It's not 4,000 years old. It's 300 years old. So anyway, this is a slightly more all-purpose point, but in my thinking, it can account for lots of things. The way the nation state has played out in the subcontinent, the way it's played out in Europe. If we could unplug that form and say, well, do we have to have one geography in which economy is, polity is, sovereignty is, loyalty is, flag is? Plainly, no, we could have others, but it's a problem of thought, first of all. And once it's there in place, of course, people have huge interests wrapped up in it, and those interests are from all sides. If you say, who is for India, whether you call it Bharat or India, everybody has the same form in mind, roughly. And I'm saying maybe that can be revised or rethought of it, but that's another story. That's a vague promissory note, but that's all I can offer now.
Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. For Mr. Arjun Appadurai, thank you so much, sir. Lovely, lovely hearing you.